Hi guys, and welcome back to video 3 of the first module. In this video, we're going to talk about the important key concepts and ideas that underline heathenry, and particularly our practice of heathenry in the modern world. We're going to look at several concepts. So it's going to look at animism, polytheism, the concept of weird, ghosty, sacrifice and reciprocity, lore, UPG, and the afterlife. Okay. And we're going to look at what each of those things are and why they're important in our practice. So first things first, animism. So animism is considered by some to be the oldest religion of humankind. So originally all our ancestors were probably originally animists. And you can see animism popping up again and again in heathenry, right out into the Viking Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, all of those sort of times, as well as Viking Age. So what is animism? The Cambridge Dictionary says it's the belief that all natural things, such as plants, animals, rocks, and thunder, have spirits and can influence human events. Okay. Now, that's the sort of traditional definition. There's also a new thing called a new animism, which I think we should take on board, even if you don't consider yourself an animist. It is an important part of new animism to play in your practice as well. So new animism, according to Graham Harvey, in his book, Animism, Respecting the Living World, he says, animists are people who recognize that the world is full of persons, but only some of whom are human, and that life is always lived in relationship with others. Animism is lived out in various ways that are all about learning to act respectfully. So this is carefully and constructively towards and among other persons. So new animism basically says the world is full of persons, they're not all human, and we should live in respectful relationship with them. Okay. So he talks about there being tree people and rock people, river people, cloud people, hedgehog people, as well as ancestors, spirits, and deities. Okay. Now, the Germanic peoples themselves, they were animistic, and they saw the world as full of spirits. Everything from land wights to elves to gods to ancestors to all sorts of spirits. Okay. And there are both spirits of things. Okay, so spirits of a tree, the spirit of the hedgehog, the spirit of the river, etc., as well as other disembodied spirits who may choose to inhabit things or to not inhabit things. So you might think of, say, a dryad who may choose to inhabit a particular tree or may not. That's more of a Greek thing, but that's essentially where animism goes. And animism involves being in relationship with these persons through both respect, so we respect them, and taboos. These taboos are things that we basically, so we don't cause problems for them. So there's certain things we should not do if we want to be in a good relationship with them. So a modern taboo may be not putting litter or non-biodegradable things out in nature as offerings. Okay. So Rune Rasmussen, he's a modern scholar of religion, and he says, animists treat the modern world as interconnected and filled with living personal beings that we should engage with respect and kindness. If we do this, the world will respond with respect and kindness. Fields will grow, livestock will be healthy and plenty, there will be fish in the water, and animals will offer themselves to the hunter. So that's a very traditional animist way of looking at the world. It's about treating other beings with respect, and then we will benefit because of that. Okay, so this is the animism. It's the sort of the foundational theology or the foundational belief in heathenry. Okay, now animism talks about there being lots of spirits and things, but what happens when those spirits become more powerful? And this is where we get into polytheism. Okay, so polytheism, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, is the belief in many different gods. You have the Greek poly, which means many, and theos, which means gods. So basically, the belief that there are many different gods, not just one god. You also have some sort of subsets, which is like duotheism. This is where there's two gods, or god and goddess, or whatever. So in Wicca, for instance, you have the god and you have the goddess. That's duotheism. And you have henotheism, which is the belief that, yes, there are lots and lots of gods, but I'm only going to worship this one god or this one couple of gods, okay? Normally it's just one god, okay? But there's still a belief in lots of other gods. You can argue maybe that was what the ancient Jewish people were thinking when you look at the Bible. They worship their Yahweh, but they still acknowledge there are other gods. And that gradually diminished over time. Now, polytheism itself can be broken up into different strands, one of which is hard polytheism, another is soft polytheism, and another you've got is archetypal polytheism. So I would say that most heathens, though, will be, and certainly in historical terms, will be hard polytheists. So what does that mean? That means the gods themselves are individual, they are distinct, they are real, and they have their own agency and their own agendas, okay? They have personalities and beings just like any human does, and we would approach them and treat them the way we would with humans. And gods are limited, okay? They're not the same as the Christian God, which is the God who is all-powerful, all-benevolent, everywhere, omniscient, all-knowing, etc., okay? They are limited. They are maybe not as limited as us, as humans, but they are limited in their powers. They cannot be everywhere at once. They cannot hear everything at once. They do not know everything, okay? You've got examples like Odin. He has to wander the world in order to find out knowledge, okay? And he has to sacrifice his eye, or he has to hang himself on the tree of Yggdrasil in order to gain the knowledge of the runes or the future or things like that, okay? They are limited. They are not all-powerful, but they are more powerful than us. Okay, in the mythology, the gods themselves are subject to fate. They don't control fate, they are subject to it. And one day they die, or most of them die, at the Battle of Ragnarok, okay, when all things are destroyed and renewed. So they are older, they are wiser, they are more powerful than humans, okay? They've been here a lot longer, they live a lot longer, they know more. They're not perfect. They're not moral exemplars. Once you read the texts, you'll see that they do a lot of things that we think are not very moral. But they are older, wiser, and more powerful. And therefore, we can choose to worship them. And we can get benefits from them in kind. Now, as I said, not all heathens in the modern day, or even in history, were polytheists. Certainly not necessarily hard polytheists. Some people are soft polytheists, and this essentially means that they believe there's this original god, or maybe an original god and goddess, who then emanate. Basically, the gods that we see are faces of this original god. So all the male gods are faces of the male one god, and all goddesses are faces of the one female goddess, okay? So the gods are not necessarily distinct and individual, they are just faces of something behind the scenes. And then you've got non-theism. So this is essentially atheism, the idea that there aren't actually any gods, at least not in the way we would typically think of as gods. So a lot of heathens who are non-theists are more here for the history and the community and things like that. But there's a version of non-theism called archetypal theism, which takes a lot of ideas from Carl Jung. He was a psychologist who has had actually a very big influence on paganism in the modern world. And he said that there are these archetypes that exist that in something called the collective unconscious, that humanity seems to develop these same symbols around the world in the same ways. So there's like the archetype of the mother, the archetype of the warrior, etc. And so he essentially says, well, maybe the gods come from that. They are just essentially archetypes that have a powerful effect on the human psyche, but are not literal beings. Okay, so that's another option. Okay, but what I'm going to do in this course is I'm going to go with the main way of looking at the gods, which is hard polytheism. Okay, because I find that that's the most historically accurate, and also most heathens fall under that camp. Okay, so let's look at this concept of weird or earther. So this is the Germanic concept of fate. The Germanic peoples were fatalistic. They believed in fate strongly. Okay, I know modern day we don't like the idea that there's fate. I would argue that there's a lot of scientific evidence to believe in fate and philosophical evidence, but we'll leave that for another conversation for another time. But certainly in the past, the Germanic peoples believed in the concept of fate. And they tended to call that weird. Okay. Now, Matthias Nordvig, he's a scholar of of Norse mythology and things like that, says it is believed that individuals are fated from the day they are born. That was the Germanic idea. But weird is more than that. Weird is not just an abstract concept of fate. Weird is a sister. She is one of three very ancient beings, and all other beings, including the gods, are subject to their will, the will of Weird and her sisters. So in the Voluspa it says, an ash I know, Yggdrasil its name, with water white is the great tree wet. Thence come the dews that fall in the dales, green by earth's Weird's well, does it ever grow. Thence come the maidens, mighty in wisdom, three from the dwelling, down neath the tree. Earth is one named, for Thandi the next. On wood they scored, and scold the third. Laws they made there, and life allotted to the sons of men, and set their fates. So what's this saying? Basically, there's this ash tree called Yggdrasil, the world tree. It sits next to Weird's well, the well of Weird. Okay. And there's these three maidens, one of which is Weird, another is or Earth, one is Verthandi, and one is Skuld. Okay, and they come to that tree and they look after the tree and they make laws there, and they allot life to men and set their fates. So they essentially control all the fates and the laws and stuff in the universe. They decide how long you get to live and all that sort of stuff. Now, there's another concept, particularly in modern heathenry, called the web of Weird, okay, which is taking this idea of weird and saying that everything that happens, or actions and events, they are like threads, okay, a bit like the Greek idea of spinning the threads of fate, okay, and these all combine and weave and weft into a web. So everything affects everything else, okay? And everything is building this one great tapestry. All the decisions you make, all the events that happen to you, everything is all interconnected, all causing and affecting other things, okay? One great tapestry. This comes the idea of spinning, and spinning was undoubtedly a really important part of ancient heathen practice. Particularly the women would have spun all their clothes and things like that. But something to note here, it says on wood they scored. Essentially, they carved. So the three beings here, the three Weird sisters or whatever, they're carving fate. They're not necessarily spinning fate, okay? So you need to look elsewhere for the idea of spinning, okay? And so there are a couple of things, particularly more in the Anglo-Saxon side of things. Weird, W-Y-R-D, is the Anglo-Saxon way of saying it. Eartha is the more Norse way of saying it. And we've got quotes from the scripture, from the sources that say things like, Weird wove this for me, or weird goes ever as she shall. Okay, and this is where the idea of spinning comes in, the idea of threads and a web. Okay, weird wove me this for me, and probably there's also Greek influence as well. Okay, the matronae. So the matronae, the mothers. Okay, we're going to come back to them in a later lecture, but they have some names and inscriptions on them, particularly up in Cumbria in England, that mention fate. Okay, and the matronae, there's 3 of them, and they may well be the more Germanic version of the Norse weird and stuff. And they control fate. Okay, in some of them do. So the question there is, how much of our lives is fated? What do you believe about fate? Okay, think about that, but certainly understand that the ancient Germanic peoples did have a strong belief in fate. Okay, we'll explore more of this sort of Norse cosmology thing with the tree and the weird sisters and all that next in the next module. Okay, ghosty. So this is probably one of the most important things to understand about heathenry. It's the very basis of all our religious practice, okay, of the way we see our religious practice, of the why for why we do what we do, okay? So ghosty is a Proto-Indo-European word meaning guest or and host, okay? It's the root of our word hospitality. It's essentially someone with whom one has reciprocal duties of hospitality. And ritual, when we're doing ritual, essentially it is about hospitality. We give offerings as the host, and they return blessings to us as a guest. We are treating them as honored guests, okay? Ritual, sacrifice, giving offerings, all that sort of stuff, worship, it's all essentially about hospitality. It's about being a good host and then being a guest. We treat them like that. Okay, we give them honor because of that. Now, hospitality was really important in the ancient world. Okay, in Tacitus Germania 21, it says, "No nation indulges more profusely in entertainment and hospitality. To exclude any human being from their roof is thought impious. Every German, according to his means, receives his guests with a well-furnished table." So essentially, it was the law that you had to show hospitality to other people, including guests, like wanderers, people you didn't know. Hospitality was like the underlying moral principle. Okay, in that type of world where being outside was very dangerous, it was important to have the ability to be inside, to be welcomed into the community. Okay, especially if you're like a traveler or something like that. Havamal, so this is a book that's seen, a book of Proverbs basically, but seen as a sort of a moral guidance for heathens. It says, "Blessed be the givers, a guest has come in. Fire is needful for someone who's come in. Food and clothing are necessary. Water is needful for someone who comes to a meal, a towel and a warm welcome." So essentially it's saying that how to be a good hospitable person. Okay, you need to give someone fire or warmth, food, clothing, water, meal, towel, warm welcome. So it's part of being a moral person is being hospitable to others. Okay, and this shows us how to do that. Okay, following on from hospitality, there's the concept of sacrifice and reciprocity. Okay, now we're going to talk more about offerings in future modules. We're also going to talk about sacrifice a bit more in future modules, but part of that guest-host relationship is reciprocity, and often it involves the giving of gifts. The guest might bring a gift for the host, like if you go to someone's house and you bring a bottle of wine or something, and the host may provide something like food, or may provide drink themselves or something for you. Okay, And this all comes back to the idea of sacrifice, which from Latin means to make sacred, or separating something from the mundane world. So a gift, a sacrifice, is something that's set apart from the mundane and becomes something sacred, okay? It's all about reciprocity, okay? Now, gift giving is really important in relationships because it helps to build up a relationship and build a bond between people. And this is essentially what we're doing. When we're sacrificing, we're giving a gift so that we can build a bond with the spirit or other person or other being or whoever. Okay, we're building a relationship, and that's what it comes down to. It's about the sacrifice of something. We're giving a gift to build a bond with another. Havermal 41-42, it says, with weapons and gifts, friends should gladden one another. Mutual givers and receivers are friends for longest. To his friend, a man should be a friend and repay gifts with gifts. So giving gifts builds friendship. It builds relationship, okay? That's why we do these sacrifices, okay? It's not about bribing and getting things from others. It's just a natural outpouring of trying to build a friendship or relationship with the gods and the spirits. That said, reciprocity does play a part. In Latin, there's a thing, a saying, do et des, which means I give that you may give, okay? I give so you can give, okay? Now, another way to look at that, more of a modern interpretation, is I give because you give, i.e. the gods give you first, and so you're giving something back to them, and then the cycle continues. It's like a cycle of giving. You give and they give, and you give and you give, they give. And it just builds a strong relationship between you, okay? But we can't expect a gift from the spirits if we haven't given them something too. A lot of people will set up an altar, they'll pray to the spirits and they'll say, please can you come and do this for me, X, Y, Z, and the spirits will be like, no. Because you need to build that gift giving first, you need to give them something first, and then they'll give something to you, and so on. It builds up, okay? You need to give that they may give, or because they give, all right? Now, there was animal and human sacrifices that went on. Well, probably it was human sacrifice that went on historically. In the modern day, please do not engage with that. If you are a properly trained farmer who knows how to raise and slaughter their own animals, that might be an exception. But for everyone else, there's just absolutely no excuse. It can also be illegal in many places for animal sacrifice. And obviously human sacrifice is a no-no, whatever happens. So just because something was given in the old days doesn't mean we will do it today. Okay, this is one place where religion evolves. As we saw when we looked at the history of it, it evolved and changed over time in terms of its practices. And in this case, again, we need to evolve and not carry out human sacrifice, and ideally not animal sacrifice either. Now, one interesting thing, we've got an account by Ibn Fadlan. He was a Muslim traveller who went along the or up to the Rus, basically, which were a group of Vikings living in the Russia area, in Ukraine area. And he said basically that they give this small gift in the grove when they first make their request. And then they promise a greater gift once the request was answered. And so they'll come back with a greater gift. So this might be something you want to think about if you are going to be praying to the gods and asking for things. Is think about giving them a small gift to start with and promising a bigger gift when it's answered. So maybe you give some incense now or some fruit now, and then you promise, I don't know, a big meal for them next time, or put some money to charity or something for them next time. Once they answer the request, okay. So that is reciprocity. We're giving, and then they're giving, and then we're giving, and they're giving, and so on. Okay. I highly recommend a book called Sacred Gifts by Kirk Thomas. He's not heathen, but he's looked at all the various Proto-Indo-European religions, and he's looked at gift giving and things like that within, and sacrifice within those religions, and put together a book about it all. And it will really help solidify this idea for you. Okay, you can see it across many different Indo-European cultures. Okay, let's have a look at the lore. So what is lore? Lore refers to all the information, the text, the archaeological sources that we have about the Northern European heathen cultures. Okay. It includes texts such as the Poetic Edda, the Prose Edda, Heimskringla, Saxo Grammaticus, Bede, Germania, the Icelandic sagas. Includes all the archaeology and place names and just lots of stuff. Basically, everything we've got from history that we can say will help teach us about the Northern European heathen cultures. Okay, but I cannot emphasize this enough. It is not a Bible. It is not infallible. It was written by humans, not gods, and almost all of it was written by non-heathens. Okay, so we pretty much have nothing written by heathens. So if you want to use it, and you should, just be careful. Remember to use it as inspiration, not as diktat. Okay, it's there to give you help and advice and ideas for your practice, but it's not the be all and end all, and you can't possibly do anything different, or you must obey every single word and all that sort of stuff. Okay, it's not that. It is sources of texts and archaeology that can be interpreted in different ways and can be used to inspire you. Okay. Now, heathenry emphasizes scholarship. Okay, so you're going to need to read a lot, and you'll need to be able to back up what you say with reliable sources, especially if you're saying in your Facebook group or something, and you say you have an opinion on something. Other heathens are going to expect you to back that up with a source. Okay. You also need to remember things like context and writer bias or writer's agenda. So, for example, the Prose Edda was written by a Christian, by Snorri Sturluson. He had a particular agenda that he wanted to preserve the myths, to preserve the texts, but he also had a bias towards the Christian worldview, which is why he systematized everything, when there probably was no systematization in reality. You have the Icelandic sagas, which were written hundreds of years after the events happened. Okay, so how did they know what was real? They would have gone off oral teachings and stuff, but probably some stuff they just made up. Tacitus, he never actually visited Germania. He was basing his ideas on what other people told him. Okay. And then you come to academic theories, like the modern academic theories, and the lore itself, and it's also often quite contradictory. And this is because people often disagree. The expressions of heathenry differ between different places and different times. And you'll find that point repeated a lot throughout this course, is that there is not just one standard pan-heathenry that's everywhere at all times. It changed a lot over time and according to place. Okay. This can be frustrating, and it really is. But it also means there's more room for your personal interpretation and choice in building your heathenry. That said, there are limits. You're not free to just make up anything you like and say that that's heathenry. If it's not rooted in a source, then it's questionable whether you should be using it. I mean, you can use it yourself, but if you're starting to tell others they have to do it a particular way, well, that's not going to be acceptable to most heathens. You need to be, if you've got a good background in the scholarship, if you read, if you look at the sources and you understand things, and then you want to give your opinion, that's fine. We'll look at UPG in a second, but the lore is there for a reason. We do need to use it. Okay, so UPG. This means unverified personal gnosis. Basically, it's when you come up with some information or a practice that's not in the lore. So you won't find any source text or anything like that. It's just basically your idea. It could be that it's actually come from the spirits and gods. It could be that they've told you something. Okay, and so you could use that in your rituals or whatever. It could be you tried something and it seemed to work well in a ritual. Now, to avoid arguments when you're discussing things with other heathens, be careful to always state if something is UPG in a conversation with other heathens. So you'll notice if you go to a Facebook group or a heathen moot, and you'll notice some people will say, "Oh, I think this, and this is my UPG," and this is what they mean. They mean it's not something in the lore; it's something they've either discovered or believe they've been told by the spirits, or something they've come up with themselves. Okay. Another place where you really need to be careful on UPG is reading heathen books. Okay, there's a lot of heathen books out there, and most of the rubbish in them is based on UPG. Okay, so ask when you're reading them, is this actually lore? Are they backing it up with the text, or is this just UPG? Okay, the same with websites as well. Now, sometimes what happens is something called SPG, or shared personal gnosis, develops. This is when groups within or a lot of people within a community all seem to have the same UPG, or the UPG seems very, it comes to be shared between a lot of people. They all agree with it. It all seems right. Doesn't mean it's based on lore, but it does mean that it's something the community has decided is usable or useful or true, okay, for that community. So the key thing here is understand that some things are in the lore, some things are not, and you need to be careful to differentiate between the two. Okay, and then let's finally look at the afterlife. So heathens don't tend to focus on the afterlife, as it's very much a religion focused on this life. So if you come into heathenry and you're basically looking for, where am I going to go when I die? What's heaven like? All that sort of thing. This may not be the right one for you. The afterlife is very much an afterthought. Okay, it's not something emphasized. If we look at the afterlife destinations in the lore, you've got hell. That's where most people go. You've got Valhalla, and also Freya's Hall. You've probably heard of Valhalla. You've got halls of various gods. So Thor, for instance, it says in the text, gets the thralls, which are essentially the slaves or the workers. You've got the mound. Some people believe in the text that they stayed in the mound. You've got dying into the mountain as a concept. You've got reincarnation. You've got Aegir and Ran, which are the gods of the sea, for where drowned sailors go to live. So a lot in the lore depends on who you are, who you worship, where you live, how you die, all those sorts of things. Okay. Now, if we want to go back even further to the Indo-Europeans, they have this concept of a meadow. And we can find this across loads of different Indo-European cultures. So you've got the Greeks, which have the fields of Elysium. You've got the Anglo-Saxons, which had Norg Snowang. You have, there's a meadow in the Norse, Ildeval, I think it's called. There's just lots of different examples within Indo-European mythologies around the world, which talk about this heavenly afterlife of a meadow. Okay, so we can argue probably that the very earliest idea of an afterlife destination was some sort of meadow. Okay, now let's talk about Valhalla. This is not the heathen heaven, no matter what it was looked like on Vikings TV series, or the emphasis that you see on it in certain parts of the lore. It's not the heathen heaven. In fact, it was probably quite a late development. And it's also a very violent place. So basically, if you go there, you get up in the morning, you fight all day, you get killed, you get resurrected, you eat some food in the evening, and then the next day you do it all again, and again, and again, and again, forever, until Ragnarok. So if that's your idea of heaven, fighting violently and dying violently, and getting cut up and all the rest of it, every day, well, that's fine, but it's not heaven, basically. Also, you certainly, well, almost certainly are not going there. Firstly, when only people that die on a battlefield will go there, okay? And a battlefield does not mean you've had some sort of battle to deal with in your life. It means you were an actual soldier in a battle and you died, okay? So if you're not a soldier who died in battle, you aren't going to Valhalla. Secondly, Freya gets first pick of half of them. So half of the people who die on the battlefield actually go to Freya's hall, not to Valhalla. So basically, if you're not a heathen and you're not a soldier and you didn't die in battle and you're not one of the 50 and you're one of the 50% that Freya chooses, then basically you're probably not going to be going there. Only 50% actually go to Valhalla. Odin only gets 50% of soldiers that die. Okay, so completely forget about whether you're going to Valhalla or not. Okay, it's probably a late development. It's violent, and you're probably not going there. Instead, what will most likely happen is you go to hell. Now, hell is not the same as the Christian fire and brimstone and all that sort of stuff. It's in most sources, it's considered a nice place. Okay, you've got Snorri who portrays it not so nicely, but on the whole, it's considered to be a nice place in most sources. And that's where you usually go, and then often people go from there onto another place. So now the soul actually is considered to have multiple parts in heathenry. You can see in the lore and in the words that they use in Old Norse and things like that, that there's multiple parts to the soul. So it's possible that maybe souls will go to different parts of you, will go to different places. Who knows? As I said, we focus more on this life than on the afterlife, but that's a possibility. One thing that is really important, though, is reputation in heathenry. In Havamal, it says, cattle die, kinsmen die, and so one dies oneself. One thing now that never dies, the fame of a dead man's deeds, okay, or the reputation of a dead man, okay. So the things you do in this life and the reputation you develop, which will outlast you, that is the thing that's really important. And that's what a lot of those warriors and things are focused on in the lore when you read them. To read something like Beowulf or something like that. Also, it is important to remember and honor your ancestors. Ancestor veneration, we're going to look at in detail. And I would say that you should be honoring your ancestors. Who you count as your ancestors is question, but it's important, and it's part of that is it helps to maintain their reputation. Okay. The key thing, though, ultimately, is you focus on this life and let the gods take care of the next. Okay, because you don't know where you're going to end up. You can probably have a guess, but ultimately you don't know. I mean, they might even reincarnate. There's all sorts of examples of things in the lore of where you might go. So don't worry too much about it. Okay, so let's finish off this module then by talking about the homework. Now, this is one of the books I want you to buy. Okay, it's called Asatru for Beginners. It's by Matthias Nordvig. He's a scholar and an academic. He teaches at universities, but he's also a practicing heathen, and that makes him quite unique in his perspective. And it means that you're going to have an academically rigorous text, but also a practical text. So I really recommend you get hold of this book and have a read of it. It's not very long. If you don't want to read it, you can also listen to it on Audible and on other audiobooks. I personally say it's the best book for beginners. It's not going to be perfect when it comes to telling you how to practice. Okay, it won't have like ritual scripts and things like that, but it will give you a really good foundation anyway. If you don't already have one, I'd recommend buying a Thor's hammer to wear. You've hopefully already got a notepad or journal, but if not, please get a notepad and journal to help you with this course. Write down your reflections and things ready for the final module. And then there's this downloaded, or this PDF This link will be under the video for you to click on, but it's basically a PDF saying about how to study Old Norse religion, to help you give a sort of a good grounding in things to think about when you're looking at the sources and stuff like that. I also recommend that you have a look at some of these other sources. So you've got Artroff Volume 1 Heathen History. That's the book that I used to do a lot of the information for the history part of the module. You also got the Heathen History podcast, which is actually run by Ben Wagner as well. If you're interested in the Indo-Europeans, so the ones that came before the Vikings and that, there's a book called In Search of the Indo-Europeans by J.P. Mallory, which is really good. And if you want to have a look at something about the Old Norse mythology sources, Matthias Nordvig, the one who wrote that book there, also has put on a free course on the Coursera website about Old Norse mythology. So that's also worth checking out. That's a 4-week course, which is really good. Okay, so that is the end of Module 1. And in about a month's time, you'll get access to Module 2, which will also be about cosmology and sacred space and things like that. So thank you for listening.